Welcome to the B2B Category Creators Podcast, hosted by Gil Allouche, founder and CEO of Metadata.io. This podcast is all about sharing the real and sometimes edgy secrets of B2B software creation. On today's episode, we have Dee Anna McPherson, CMO at Invoca, and Joe Chernov, CMO at Pendo.io.
Well, happy Friday. Thank you for joining. I'm very excited to have you both on the podcast. Do you have your alcoholic beverage?
I do.
All right. I am going to pour it into this plastic cup. So not very classy, but
classy.
It's what they provide these days. So we'll have to make do. What do you have to drink there?
I have a Paloma. So it's
Oh, I love Palomas.
Yeah, tequila, soda, grapefruit, and lime.
That's great. It's one of my favorite drinks. Paloma is awesome. Did you make it with with your favorite, or is it just like whatever you have at home?
Yeah, just whatever I had. But I guess I haven't. I can't remember the last time I had a cocktail. I kind of stopped drinking during the kind of lockdown. So if I start slurring my words, you know why.
Sounds good, and that's probably a very healthy thing to do. Many people did exactly the opposite during the lockdown. Joe, what are you drinking there?
I did exactly the opposite during the lockdown. I am having this beer. I moved to the Raleigh area this summer. I spent my whole life in Boston, and it just so happens that probably the best brewery in the country is in Massachusetts. And I was longing to find a replacement when I moved here. And there are two, and one of them is this brewery called Burial. And all of their can art is very nightmarish. And so this one is Preternatural Ambience double IPA, and it's very menacing can with a it looks like a octopus trying to break through a wall into some spooky room. So they're all fairly grim and goblinish.
Sounds exciting. I mean, drinking that goblin might be delicious. I'm just drinking this bourbon here, so pretty simple. I'm gonna pour myself a little bit. I'm very excited about these episodes today. So we're in the Category Creators Podcast. My name is Gil Allouche. I'm the founder and CEO of Metadata.io. Let's get to meet the guests. Dee Anna, maybe you can start. Introduce yourself for the audience, the people who don't know you.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. So I'm Dee Anna McPherson. I'm the CMO at Invoca. I've been with the company about a year, and we're in the conversation intelligence space. Previously, I also ran marketing for Hootsuite and Yammer. So 3 different times, kind of creating categories in very different stages.
Yes, very exciting. I remember in our chat, you pulled up some really interesting examples, when to create a category, when not to create a category, some of those signals. So I'm excited to hear from all the experiences you got through. Joe, you're next. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and to the rest of us.
Sure. And I think my old CEO once said, Yammer is my Twitter. So my name is Joe Chernov. I lead the marketing team at Pendo. I've been here going on 2 years next month. And prior to Pendo, I had run the content programs at Eloqua going back several years, and HubSpot a few years later, and some smaller startups peppered in between. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's kick it off. One of the things that we really concentrate in the category creators is no secret about category creation. The impetus behind it is that many entrepreneurs are keen, passionate, being pushed to create a category for all kinds of reasons. We're trying to demystify that concept. Should you create a category? When? How do you create it? How do you know it's actually happening? So on and so forth. And so would love to get your kind of first thought. And we can start with you, Joe. What do you think about creating a category? Are you trying to create a category with Pendo or with the previous company?
Yeah, when I joined Pendo, I think we thought we were trying to create a category, but I never thought, I never really bought it. What we're doing is rolling up adjacent categories into one. And so if you squint, maybe that's creating a category, but we were the only one in it, so it's not really a category. We're a company that is like, we are the product stack for a head of product. And so we have product analytics, in-app guidance, feedback collection. These were all like kind of discrete categories. And our mission was to be horizontal play, be it all-in-one play. And we were looking at the all-in-one play as a category. But I don't think that in and of itself makes for a category. Now where we're going, and we can talk about this later, I don't want to dominate, but where we're going, we will need to create a category for, because it's more elementally disruptive than a roll-up of known things.
Interesting. Okay, so you talk about you had a few subcategories maybe that you're thinking about consolidating, but maybe where you're going to the future is more disruptive and actually merits its own category. Dee Anna, what's your thoughts from your experience in a few different companies that created categories?
Yeah, so if I think back to my time at Yammer, so I joined there in about 2010, and the company had launched, maybe a year or so before that. And they launched at TechCrunch, Disrupt, and actually won that competition. And they were sort of dubbed by the media, we're Twitter for business. And it was this new emerging category of like a new way to communicate inside your company. And there were other companies that sort of played on the margins. There was certainly companies that, SharePoint, that's how you should share information on your company intranet. And, of course, there was email, and social in the enterprise was just starting to emerge. And then the whole business model of freemium in the enterprise, that was new too. So we didn't look like anything else that was out there. So we really, that was the one case where we created a category and we named the category, and the market did follow. So Forrester and Gartner actually ended up adopting the terminology that we coined. So that was, one successful case where it made a lot of sense because it was a completely new product. And in other cases, you're, changing the way things are done. And in that case, it may make sense to, play in an existing category and dominate that category. But if you're doing something that the market's never seen before, then at that point, you need to define it and you need to evangelize the category.
Interesting. Can you maybe walk us through, briefly, maybe visually, how did you get from doing something disruptive that you knew was maybe not covered even to getting the Gartner and the Forresters of the world to repeat the same words, the same lingo that you wanted to, the narrative that you wanted to promote?
Yeah, so the blessing and the curse of the early days of Yammer is we had a lot of attention. We had a lot of negative attention. A lot of people just hated us. The analysts hated us. They would actively, blog and share on Twitter, how horrible we were. They called us like the drug dealers of the software industry, and that we were like the smoke that would kind of sneak in under your door and choke you. So there was a lot of negative attention because this model of allowing employees to go choose what software you want to use in your company, and then the virality that was built in that encouraged you to invite all of your other coworkers to join. At the time prior to that, IT people chose what software you were going to use inside your company, and then they would roll it out. So this was really disruptive, and we were pissing off our, would-be like customers, paying customers. So we launched with a lot of attention. There was a lot of conversation. People had opinions about us. And so in a way that was good because it brought attention and it actually attracted people to use and try the software. The other thing that it did is it encouraged all these IT people who were trying to figure out how the heck do I, manage the software that's made its way into my organization. They would call the analyst and say, what should I do? And something I learned going through that experience at Yammer is if you want an analyst to create a wave or a quadrant on your space, one of the big factors is the inbound call volume that they get from their paying customers. And because they were being inundated with calls from IT people saying, what the heck do I do about this, Yammer, that got their attention. And then it was sort of a long process of kind of trying to sell them on our point of view and why the old way of doing things, forwarding information by email or going to a company intranet, was the old way of doing things and there was a better way.
It's like call your senator to get a million, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's like lobbying. I mean, that's really very much.
It really is.
That's what, like, we actually used to refer to it as that, like constant campaigning or lobbying, trying to get them to see our point of view. And we said, the biggest risk with any software deployment is that people won't use it. And so we take the risk out of it by getting people to engage first before you actually have to upgrade and pay. And so we would just hammer on that. And generally, the way the companies that do well in a wave or a quadrant are the ones with the broadest feature set. And our perspective was like, no, like these bloated, like piece of software, that's in the rear view mirror. It's all about, engagement is the new ROI. You want people to use it and you got to slim it down. So we lobbied for, 2 years to get them to change the criteria because we said, we're not going to put these other features in our product. And so they finally came around and did create a new category, and they called it enterprise social networking, which is what we dubbed the category.
It's that really reminds me of Analyst experience I had. And I'm pausing because I'm trying to think if I want to withhold the company name. I'm going to withhold the company name for now. It was MQ season, and we were in the right category. And we realized it was very difficult to move your dot. Once your dot was placed, you will forever live with that placement. I literally had like tracing paper, and I had every year's MQ, and I stacked them up, and all the dots stayed in the same friggin' spot. They moved like imperceptibly. And so we said, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have the analysts come in, and we're like going to know the dance, and they're going to know the dance. We're going to pay him to come in and, air quotes, consult with us for a day. And really that means the CEO gets to walk him around the building and like hobnob, and, he gets a sense that he's contributing to the future direction of the company. And ultimately, like, all we really want to do is kind of grease him a bit, both in terms of paying the consulting fee and ego stroking. And so we had him for a whole day, and I don't know, it's $40,000 or something at the time. And it's like 1 o'clock, and he looks at his watch and he's like, guys, my girlfriend lives in town and I'd like to go visit. You mind if I bail out of here? Like, he knew it was all baloney. He knew that this was all like pretense. And so the MQ comes out, we're in the same spot. And I said, look, we gave you every customer. We answered every question. How do we not move? We're like twice as big as we were last year. And he said, I take all of that data, and that contributes like 50% of your placement. And I said, what's the other 50%? He said, my opinion. And so wherever they moved us, he would just move us back. And the only way to break out of this was to get in a new MQ. And so we went through the organization and briefed a bunch of adjacent analysts. And one of them was like, I'm thinking about this new space, and I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want to illuminate anyone. And the person was like, and I'm thinking of calling it this. It was never a term we used. We're like, that's a brilliant term. You should use that term. In fact, we're going to put all of our marketing might behind that term. We think you should do an MQ on that. Remember, like, where you're placed at the beginning is where you shall forever live, or that, at least at the time it was. And so we were like the champions of that first MQ because that was our best shot for an upper right placement. And lo and behold, that's what we got. And lo and behold, the company exited on the back of that Magic Quadrant.
Fascinating. So 2 different approaches completely. One is lobbying, almost pissing them off and getting inbound phone calls to change your mind. And the other one is just championing a different person to going after a different term altogether, because it doesn't matter how much you dine them and pay them their protection fee, they still don't take you off to the right place.
Our $40,000 is a rounding error. Like, Blue Cross Blue Shield is who they care about, right? Like, they don't care about some venture-backed SaaS company. Like, we don't have enough money to get their attention. Blue Cross Blue Shield, or the like, right, has enough money to get their attention.
This is a hack. I mean, those two are hacks, right? I mean, this is how I look at those. Because these are tactics that you can deploy. You can say, hey, customers, you love us. You have put 200 reviews on G2. Can you pick up the phone or send an email to this gentleman, or if you have Forrester, to that lady, and say what you think? Or you go to the biggest customer you have and tell them, what do you think is a good name for this category?
Yeah, I heard
Awesome.
a new term recently, community-led growth. And now when I think about that, I'm like, that's kind of like that played a big role with both Yammer and Hootsuite, and getting really close to your customers and having a really active customer community where they're also helping each other figure out if you're truly doing something new, they're helping each other find their way, and then you can stay really close to them, and then really make them the poster children for something that's new and innovative. And with Yammer, the way we kind of turn things around with IT is we decided, okay, we need to get to them early and often, and we need to make them see that this is kind of the way of the future. And we found a few CIOs who saw this as an opportunity to really raise their own personal profile and attaching themselves to something new and innovative. And we had a few customers. There was one, not a CIO, but a customer from Deloitte Digital. He literally within 1 year did over 100 speaking engagements talking about Yammer.
Wow.
Most of them were on his own. He was a high profile person, but it was something new and innovative, and it was an opportunity to elevate himself. And we found a couple of CIOs as well. And we just got them out there, and then they became active in the community, and people saw their profiles really raising, and other people were like, I want to do that too. And then their customers were just sort of almost knocking your door down to want to speak at your events and participate in your marketing activities, and then also talking to the press and analysts. So I highly recommend building that customer community from the get-go.
At Eloqua, we perp-walked Megan Eisenberg, a very prominent CMO now, to every single event. Megan Eisenberg had Eloqua handlers with her at all times. And we picked a good one, right? She's maybe the best marketer in tech, one of the top 5 in B2B. And, we were in the star making business a bit.
Interesting. How do you create that community? How do you get that gentleman from Deloitte or Megan Eisenberg to actually act on your behalf, to do 100 speaking engagements a year, talking about your brand? That's unbelievable. How do you get to that situation as a startup?
So in the case of Yammer, we created an online community, and we actually used our own product to do that. And there was a lot of, it was very actively community managed. So we had 2, and I think at the end, maybe even 3 full-time community managers active, spawning conversation. We had our product people, we had our executives. So that was really orchestrated in that community, and then through physical events as well. At Hootsuite, that was another big part of the strategy. The customers were social media managers. So they wanted, by nature, they were sharers. They wanted to get out there and talk. And if you could empower them, give them content, they were looking to grow their follower count in social. So we would just send them really interesting content. And we actually used Influitive. I think you have an association with Mark Organ, so that was his company. We were one of their earliest customers. And we used Influitive to kind of manage our program there. And at Invoca, we have, and it's more enterprise centric. So 300 customers, we don't have millions of end users. It's a more of an enterprise product. So we have a customer advocacy program, and we just, really actively engage with them. There's executives who kind of pair up with customers, and we have a team internally managing customer advocacy.
Very cool.
I operate off the premise that everyone is terrified. Impostor syndrome is rampant in tech. People get titles prematurely. It's filled with a lot of youth, and it's changing nonstop. And the sense of feeling left behind is real and acute. And the best way to create a community is to understand that, not to exploit that, but just to understand that everybody in the room is terrified, including the person in front of the room, because man, it's hard to keep up. And so if you can get customers and prospects together to talk about something meaningful, and that something is like at the forefront of change, and you can address their unspoken concerns, the concerns that they're like feel but are afraid to give voice to, but you can give voice to it on their behalf and address it on their behalf and address it from fellow practitioners, not like you just pick up the tab as the brand. Your job is to pick up the tab and to bring together the people on the front lines and then let them do the work for you. Like that's how a community is built. It's built on the back of like people that know they need to keep up with change. And then the front-line folks that are actually implementing that change. And then as a brand, recede behind the curtain and just pick up the tab at the end.
Tell me about a moment that was in the category creation path, in the work of creating or defining a category that you felt was a failure or some critical moment not of success in that path.
I was at a company and we were creating a category. And in this case, like we actually were creating a category. Like I think a lot of category creation is basically redefinition of something that already exists, not really a category, it's a new brand. But in this case, like it was a real thing. As it turned out, it wasn't a category that was big enough to justify being a category. Like it was a category, it just wasn't enviable in the size, right? But nevertheless, the category was interesting enough that it got the attention of I don't know, one of the three best known brands in all of tech. And that brand moved to acquire us. And they moved to acquire us on the back of a Forrester wave. And it was a Forrester wave on that category. And it was going to be change your life outcome for me. And a lot of the work was on the back of marketing, right? Because it was really on this sales report. And so we're going through the process and you can see it playing out, that all the diligence and God, these interviews, and it was like, you know, it's like getting into Stanford. It was really this ordeal. And you knew it was at some point the worm was turning and it was going sideways. And you could just feel like this isn't going well. We went from like having dinner together to being at odds on opposite sides of the tables. It was we weren't going to get it. And finally, they sort of showed their hand and they were like, we love this category, love the topic. You guys are like top player. I'm like, I don't know, we've done weeks of diligence and it's not adding up for me. I'm not getting it. How did this come about? And I was just way too honest. And I said, oh, my entire marketing program has been built around working that analyst to write this report. And I should have never said that. It was like the stupidest thing I possibly could have said. Like I basically leaned into his concern and validated it. And I could see on his face, dead man walking, like this thing is over. And the acquisition didn't happen.
Oh.
It subsequently exited successfully.
Well, first of all, cheers to that story. It was a badass story. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's great. You know, you learn from those moments the most. Like you probably just helped my future self in some kind of similar situation. I'm going to definitely remember that story. So thank you. That was a great story. Dee Anna.
You know, back to my time at Yammer, we had, you know, we were acquired by Microsoft in our fourth year for $1.2 billion. So that, you know, at the time seemed like a phenomenal exit. You know, at the time, Salesforce had been entering the category. They launched with a Super Bowl ad. And I think, you know, it sort of maybe spooked us a little bit into exiting the category too soon. And now you look and see Slack's come in and dominated that category and had a, you know, $27 billion exit. So I think getting nervous about competition. I would say that in an emerging category, competition is actually good. It's, you know, it's kind of growing the category. And, you know, I wish we would have held on.
Yeah, isn't that a thing though? Like, this is one of the weaknesses of entrepreneurs, is they know cerebrally category creation good, but then emotionally, it's like, wait, why is my competitor using our terms? And as a marketer, you got to be like, no, that's a good thing. But they're like, no, but this is ours. And it's like, yes, but the only way for it to be a category is for somebody else to take that term and to beat us over the head with it. We have to, that's like an occupational hazard of creating a category. And that's sort of the CMO's job in some ways of category creation, is reassuring the founder that that's a good thing and a necessary thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Exiting that category just because of the nature of the M&A was what you're almost regretting on here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not complaining. It was very successful. It was a very successful outcome. So I'm not complaining. But, you know, in hindsight, you're like, oh, it was, you know, it was bound to be huge. So it would have been fun to stay in and, you know, kind of fight it out.
Yes.
Because of the innovator's dilemma, you might never have become Slack, though, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Sometimes those acquisitions happen for a moment, for a reason. The 1 billion was not for nothing. They probably saw the same thing. It's interesting what you said about emerging categories and how the founders are paranoid about competitors. I can confirm on my end or deny, but there is definitely when you see a competitor, you know, that is gaining momentum, especially in a category that you play, it is a little nerve-wracking, but it is also a huge deal because it validates the fact that you're even doing something meaningful versus just doing something on the sidelines. It's interesting how you say reassure the CEO. I guess if you have a path to tell the founder or the CEO that there's a plan to get ahead, I think it's all good. I mean, at the end of the day, that's exactly what you want to happen, but easier said than done. Do you think you can create a category in today's world without the analyst consent?
I do. I mean, if customers are willing to pay you for it, sure. I don't think that analysts are really a top of funnel thing. Like, you know, okay, here's a wave. Now everyone's going to go out and buy the product. I mean, I think you need to get customer adoption first. And if there's movement in the market, then the analysts will follow. So I think, you know, the first thing you want to do is focus on getting traction. That's number one. And that should always be your primary focus is, you know, serve your customers well, give them value, and everything else will fall in line.
Yeah, I think the importance of analysts is proportionate to how far up market you sell. Klaviyo is one of the hottest companies in tech, and they sell to very small direct-to-consumer brands. You think a very small direct-to-consumer brand is subscribing to Gartner? No. So they don't need an analyst because the guy that, you know, makes cool wallets or the woman who makes beautiful iPhone cases, they're not reading waves and MQs. So it doesn't really matter there, right? Like HubSpot eschewed analysts for the longest time. They probably don't anymore, but when I was there, they did.
Meaning they ignored them or didn't work with them?
They resented them and didn't work with them and made it public. And they said analysts can be bought, and that's why we're backing G2 Crowd. The dirty little secret was analysts didn't think highly of HubSpot because its product wasn't as robust as everything else. And so HubSpot decided to turn the tables. But like the HubSpot category, you knew inbound was a thing. I knew inbound was a thing, not because of an analyst report, but because I was at a pool one day and I see this couple laying in their chaise lounges. And one of them is reading Michael Lewis, The Big Short, and the other is reading Halligan and Dharmesh's Inbound. I'm like, that's a thing, right? Like this is happening. And so sometimes it's just like pointillistic. You see these little vignettes and you're like, something's happening here. And you don't necessarily need the MQ. The big value of the MQ is enterprise and M&A.
Yeah, a lot of CMOs, you were talking about building an audience, I think earlier on, Dee Anna, you were talking about building that community. Dave Gerhardt from Drift, now he's at a different company, was talking about building a community. Anthony Canada, as well as Nick Mehta from Gainsight, where he was here talking about building a community and making finding the persona, right? For them, it was a customer success manager that didn't get much love, making them, first-class citizen in the organization, putting content behind it, best practices, so on and so forth. I know you mentioned, Dee Anna, that one of the things you did at Yammer, I think at Hootsuite as well, using the platform. Did you find any ways, and you used Influitive, so you had a piece of software to help you with that. Did you find any tactics or best practices to set up a community like that to be almost self-sufficient, like growing by itself or in organic, or how do you tackle that project? At what stage do you allocate yourself to it?
Yeah, well, when you have millions of users and you're inviting a large community, you cannot expect it to be self-managing. And you also have to expect the first 6 months of creating this online community to be incredibly painful. And we really, would have to set expectations with the executives and especially the product people, because oftentimes they'll first come into a community and sometimes the customers will think, well, okay, this is my opportunity. I'm going to really try to influence, my thoughts on the product, or complain about things, or think of it as a support community. And even though you would try to, manage that, it was going to happen for a while. And you just had to, expect that. And then you would start to, turn it into a more productive conversation where it's not about like support questions, but this is a community helping each other. So it takes active management. And I think you need a really skilled person to manage it. If you just put it out there, either it's going to fall flat and people aren't going to engage, or, they could come and sort of beat you up to lobby for the features that they want.
Okay, so very intentional. At what stage did you said you had millions of users, so that was fairly late in the
No, because they were both freemium products. So we had millions of users, before we had a whole lot of revenue. So that was the case there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Joe, you mentioned your Pendo to be I think you call it product or the stack for VP of product or for the product team. Do you work on a community? Do you work on an audience, like your own movement?
We do in two ways. One is we have a user conference that has the greatest name of any user conference of any company. And I can say that because I didn't name it, and it was named before I arrived. And the minute I heard it before I was here, I was like, my God, that's a genius name. And so Todd Olson, our CEO, named it Pendemonium. And Pendemonium is our user conference. Now this year, Pendemonium is a little different, right? Because it's virtual. So this year it was a little bit less about how to become a better Pendo user and a little bit more about a brand event. But we build that community around helping people become better product professionals. It's never going to be as wide as a company with 1 million users, right? It's never going to be that broad. Like everybody in a company needs to communicate, but not everybody in a company needs to build the product. And so this is more narrow and deep. Then we have a second community called Product Craft. And my predecessor, guy Jake Sarfman, deserves all the credit for Product Craft. That was not my idea. That was Jake, and he did an unbelievable job. And Product Craft is less about being like a great Pendo user, and it's more about like the passion for great products. And it skews toward the people behind those great products. So we have like more of a wide and shallow and more of a narrow and deep. And those are our two communities.
Interesting. They work in parallel? No conflict? Like you just run those two programs essentially in parallel?
Yeah, there's some overlap, but not conflict. And it's funny, we just were talking about this the other day. I think 3 of the speakers at our first Pendemonium now work here. Pretty good recruiting strategy, expensive recruiting strategy, but pretty good recruiting nevertheless.
What today with a lot of data, a lot of technology, a lot of access to creative and content and very wealthy marketing mix, especially for both of you. You're experienced, you have teams and technology and allocation. What do you think is the most important trait that a CMO in a B2B company should bring to the table today?
I've been actually thinking about this very question. I've been thinking about the difference between a VP of marketing and a CMO. And the difference is time horizon. If, as a CMO, you're living quarter to quarter, you're thinking about the next 90 days, you are an underpaid head of sales. Your job as CMO is to not be thinking about how you're going to make the next quarter or Q+1 or Q+2. It's how are you going to go from, if you're at 50 million, how are you going to go from 200 to 800? If you're at 100 million, how are you going to get to a billion? That's the CMO's job. And to find people that can run the day-to-day, that can worry about Q+1, Q+2, Q+3, so you don't have to. And then you spend your time worrying about how you're going to double a couple of years out. I think that's the difference. And I think the key to becoming a successful CMO is to put in place the team that can give sales what sales needs so that you can focus on clearing a path for the bigger picture down the line.
Dee Anna, do you agree with that?
I do. I think that's a great perspective. I think marketing of all the departments in a company, you really almost have like the broadest range of skill sets. So you have really quantitative people, you have technical people, you have the creatives, you have the storytellers, and everything in between. And other departments, you have front-end engineers or back-end engineers, but they're all engineers, same with HR people. So the marketer kind of has the toughest job in the company. You've got this broad set of responsibilities. But I think that I often get asked, oh, should our CMO be demand gen oriented, or should they be a product marketer, or should they have what background? And I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think a CMO really needs to operate almost at a general manager level. You need to have people who are strong at all the functions, but you really need to kind of be kind of at the core of so many different things that the company is doing. And so I like Joe's perspective around operating on a different time horizon. You really need to have strong deputies at each of the different functions. And you need to think about, that overall customer experience, developing the market, understanding what's happening, in the broader market so that you can help set the strategy.
That's such a perfect response, Dee Anna. I called when I took over this role, and demand gen wasn't exactly where it needed to be. And I was kind of sweating that. Like, you almost have to earn the right for the longer time horizon. I called Kip Bodner at HubSpot CMO. And I worked really closely with Kip when I was there. Good friends with Kip. Kip's a really special guy. And I'm like, dude, you got to help me out. Like, how do you, like, it's a gazillion-dollar company now, man. Like, how do you focus downstream when there are all these, or upstream when there are all these downstream, like, intense needs? Like, how do you balance them? And he said, I don't. I hire people to worry about the downstream issues so I can focus upstream. It was like this seminal conversation that left such an impact on my outlook of the job. Whereas, like, there's no way you could do both. So you have to declare a major, and then you have to hire people to do the other thing and get out of their way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Live in the present or fix the present so that you can live in the future. That's sometimes the balance that we have to keep. That's very true. Outside of category creation, choose a moment that we collect quite interesting stories that way. So I have to ask this question because it's always full of magic. And Dee Anna, your #fail moment was not too faily. So I'm gonna double down here on the embarrassing story. Tell me an embarrassing story from your, let's say, 10, 15 last years as a professional working in companies that created categories, that did a lot of big deals. A moment of great embarrassment.
Oh gosh, I have to think about that. Oh, I could tell you, I mean, huge, this isn't in my last 10 to 15 years. This was very early in my career, and I will never forget it. And it was a huge lesson. This is a very tactical mistake, but early in my career, I started in the PR world, and I was, pretty junior in my career, and I came up with this idea for this press, back then we did press conferences. It was IBM there was speculation they were going to make a big acquisition. My client was actually Gartner. Gartner was my client. And I said, we're going to call a press conference. We're going to do commentary on it, and we'll be all over the news. This was like pre-internet. And we put out the news alert for it. We got press from all over the world. Hundreds of press signed up for this. I'm sitting in Renee Edelman's office, and she's telling me what a great job I did. This was all my idea. I set it up. And then the phone starts ringing off the hook. I had the wrong phone number, dial-in phone number for this press conference. I had hundreds of reporters calling in, and it was like the wrong number. And this was like before email, like this is when you called and faxed people. So that was like, a great lesson in attention to detail. It's like the nitty-gritty little details will get you in the end. So I will never forget that.
Oh man, that sounds tough. Did you, since there was no email, no reply to all, sorry, just use this other Zoom link.
We got like
What'd you do?
Dozens of people calling up all these reporters and giving them the new phone number.
Joe Chernov, what's your story?
Well, I get a lot of them. When I was at Eloqua, we produced, it was like sort of in the era of a lot of like the rise of visual content and infographics. And we created this infographic that was inspired by, it was a take on Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Message. And it was about the rise of influencers. And we released it at South by Southwest. And it was like months of research had gone into this thing. And I moderated a panel, and it had like a who's who of influential figures at the time. And I'm dyslexic. And so it should have been, it was about the rise of influencers. So we were turning into the message into the messenger. And that was the twist on the Marshall McLuhan. So it should have been the medium is the messenger. But being dyslexic, I transposed the whole thing. And it was the messenger is the medium. And it just garbled the whole, like it inverted the meaning and everything. And months of work, and nobody like compared the title of the book to what the title of the thing was. And so I'm moderating this panel. And because I've got all these muckety mucks on it, like I'm actually nervous. And I usually don't get nervous, but I'm actually nervous. And so like my voice is breaking. It's not going great. And then the first question somebody asks is they stand up in the audience and they're like, did you invert the Marshall McLuhan book? And the very first question, I'm like, oh my God. Look, I'm dyslexic. I got a thing. I flip-flop things all the time. It was brutal.
Oh God.
That's probably it.
Brutal stories. I like that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Cheers. Any last final words for our audience? As a reminder, most of our audience are entrepreneurs, CEOs, CMOs, and VPs of marketing that are still trying to understand where their job ends and where the CMO job starts. But all of them are looking to learn how to create a category or think distinguishedly whether they should or not. Any final words for them?
I mean, I think the biggest lesson is you got to be bold. I mean, you just really have to be bold when you're creating a category. You have to have a strong point of view, and you've got to get people to agree with you. And, you kind of don't do that by anything other than, having a very bold perspective and getting people excited about the way you see things developing.
Love that. That's very true. It's sometimes easier said than done.
I'd say that people are going to push you to create a category because that's become a reflexive position. But it's not binary. It's not create a category or be run of the mill, right? That's a false choice. You can expand a category. You could combine categories. Like there's a lot in between. And so I would say be intellectually honest and ask yourself, am I replacing somebody else that's a budgetary line item? Or is there no line item for what I sell and I've got to create one? If there's no line item for what you sell, category creation might be the way to go. If you're going to replace an incumbent or you're going to replace a way that they're currently doing something, then maybe category expansion is what you want to do, a category redefinition, right? But it's probably not creation. And so your company doesn't suck if you're not creating a category. You could do plenty well in redefining one. So I would start with that binary. Are you replacing a budgetary line item or are you creating a budgetary line item? And that should inform some decisions.
It does. It's super insightful. I think that's a simple question, maybe not an easy one to tackle because there's a lot of you getting skewed to sometimes do it anyway. But that's very interesting. Thank you for that, and thank you for participating. I really enjoyed this episode. You have a wealth of knowledge, both of you. I wrote down a lot of content. Some of it I'm gonna do myself, and the rest I'm gonna share with no, I'm gonna share all of it with the audience. Thank you for really good insight and a fun conversation. Have a wonderful rest of the Friday and great weekend.
Dee Anna, it was a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers.
Thank you, Dee Anna. Thank you, Joe. Bye-bye, folks.
Thanks again for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion and will tune in again. Find all of the B2B Category Creators episodes at Metadata.io. And if you have any feedback, topics, or would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out.